Hello everybody, I'm Keith Spera from NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. Welcome to Let's Talk. My guest today spent 43 years as a Xavier University professor while also performing and recording as one of New Orleans' most prolific traditional jazz clarinetists. Indicative of his stature within the culture, the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery recently acquired a painting of him for display. In retirement, he plans to continue the creative tear he's been on recently, writing new songs just about every day. Here to talk about all that, jazz, and more is Dr. Michael White. Dr. White, thank you for being here, sir.
Thanks for having me.
You brought a couple of friends right here on the table, one of which anyone who's been in downtown New Orleans might recognize because it has a very special place in a big way on the side of the Holiday Inn downtown, that giant 150-foot tall clarinet. This is the very clarinet on which it was modeled, correct?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So what is the story of this particular horn here? It's this one here, this fella.
Yes, well, this clarinet is very historic because it was owned by one of the early legends of New Orleans jazz, the great Omer Simeon. And Omer Simeon played with Jelly Roll Morton, recorded with him on some of his most important songs in the jazz age in the 1920s. And Omer Simeon went on to have a career later and recorded and played with people like Kid Ory and many others. So this was one of his clarinets. He was living in New York, and I had acquired it after his demise from a music store, and it was for sale on consignment. And I saw it, I said, oh man, Simeon's clarinet, I don't believe it. So I was up there to do some recording with Wynton Marsalis. I went to this music store and I said, prove it. So they had it verified. And I went home, but I kept thinking about it. I said, oh, that clarinet was a little expensive at the time, I thought. And when I got home, I said, I better buy this thing if they still have it. So I called the store, they still had it. I said, let me have it. So this was Omer Simeon's clarinet. It's a B-flat Albert system made by the Selma Company. And this was modified or improved in the late 1920s. And this was a favorite clarinet, preferred clarinet for most of the early jazz legends like not only Omer Simeon, but Johnny Dodds, Sidney Bechet, Jimmy Noon, George Lewis, and many others.
All those guys.
Yes.
So how did they end up using this clarinet as the model for the one painted on the side of the Holiday Inn?
Well, the owner of the Holiday Inn at the time, Diane Windinger, called me and asked me if I would serve as a consultant, like the hotel historian. And they wanted to paint a mural to indicate the importance of the city in that area, you know, downtown, part of Black Storyville, where jazz was very important, you know, in the early 1900s. And so I had a collection of clarinets. I lost many of them. I lost more than 50 in Hurricane Katrina. But fortunately, among the dozen that I brought with me when I evacuated was this one.
Wow.
And this horn has been very lucky for me in a lot of ways. But it was a no-brainer that this would be the one because it's very beautifully made and it represents the history of the city very well. So it's become an iconic thing, and one of the things I do all the time now is you know, when I'm at a red light, I see people looking and pointing, and I'm thinking, you know, that's my clarinet.
That's my clarinet. And I love the fact that it's not just a generic clarinet that they painted 150 feet tall. It's a clarinet that actually belonged to a legend of New Orleans jazz and probably was used on recordings with Jelly Roll Morton, one of the greatest figures of the dawn of jazz. So that's really kind of cool that it's got this this history to it. You know, it's not just a generic clarinet that's up there. And also, I think you told me what you paid about $1,000 for it or something like that.
Yeah, about that. You know, and it's brought me a lot of luck since. So well,
and then real quickly, the story of the program that was on. You actually won some prize money for owning this clarinet?
Yes, National Geographic had a TV series of a few years ago called America's Lost Treasures, and they went to 10 cities. They came to New Orleans, and dozens of people brought in all kind of artifacts from all over the city throughout history. And it was sort of like one of these, it was a combination of a contest show and one of these antique shows. And so they would pick the item that they thought had the most value to represent that city, and this clarinet won. And the idea was it was supposed to be in the National Geographic Museum for a year, and the owner of the object would get $10,000.
So you paid $1,000 for it, and you won a $10,000 prize just for owning it.
That's right.
So you're $9,000 ahead on this particular clarinet.
A little more than that too. Yes, yes.
Well, and the funny thing is, though, is you were explaining before we went on that it's actually very difficult to play. I mean, compared to the more contemporary clarinet that you typically use. I mean, the guys that played these back in the day, they were working hard to play these clarinets.
Yeah, well, this is the old Albert system clarinet. Even though it's an improved Albert, the fingering is more difficult. It's more difficult to get around technically. Now, of course, a lot of guys did, like Barney Bigard and Jimmy Noon and the rest, Omer Simeon. I mean, they played so much stuff on these horns, it's hard to believe how they got around. But most people play what is called the Boehm system. Boehm system is easier to finger, but there's a controversy as to which one sounds better. A lot of people think because the old New Orleans clarinet players had such individual and incredible sounds that the Albert system sounds better. And there are, a plethora of beautiful tones and sounds that came out of the early jazz players, but they're much harder to finger. So I have it, and every now and then I fool with it a little bit, but I really can't play it because it's the finger stretch, for one thing, is just too tough.
Right, you got to have big hands to play this particular.
Yes.
Yeah, that helps. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. No, it is. It's a beautiful instrument. I mean, just to look at the thing. I mean, it's but also it's intimidating. I mean, when I look at this horn as someone who does not play music, I'm like, my gosh, how do you learn your way around it? What initially attracted you to play the clarinet back in the day?
Well, New Orleans is a music city, and I would do things like, when I go to Mardi Gras parades, I'd see St. Aug's band in the parade, and I wanted to be in that band. But
the St. Aug Marching 100?
Marching 100, yes. Which I ended up in. But my aunt used to play the clarinet, and she used to play around the house. She was a music major in college, and she would pull out her old clarinet 2 or 3 times a year and her dusty music book, and she'd play, and she had such joy on her face, and I just loved the sound of the instrument. So I said, I want to play that. So when I was about 14 years old, I started playing, taking lessons. Went to St. Augustine, took lessons, private lessons from the band director, Edwin Hampton, for 4 years, and I was part of the Marching 100 in the symphonic band.
Which, on the face of it, you would not necessarily think that the Marching 100 was a training ground for someone who's going to play traditional jazz, because you guys did, more the marching band repertoire and popular tunes and what have you. But the skills, I'm guessing, that you learned studying with Mr. Hampton personally and just learning to play with a very large ensemble, a 100+ person ensemble, was actually probably good training for playing jazz with an ensemble.
Well, it was excellent training for me, because my first 4 years as a jazz musician, I was in a brass band. And I played, a lot of social club parades, jazz funerals, church parades, and things like that. And but it was great musical training as well, because with Hamp I was in the method books and studying etudes, and they were progressive and got more and more difficult. So that was a good thing, because at St. Aug's band we played a lot of marches, and in New Orleans jazz, marches are very important. So I already knew about marches, like certain parts have a different volume, a different feeling, and to make them effective, even though you're improvising. But that's kind of how you played marches. So I was ready for that.
Well, you improvise around a structure, right? I mean,
yes.
There's a structure that you improvise, which is what a jazz band to a large degree does, especially those early jazz bands. You improvise around the structure of the song. So it was good training for you then. Yeah,
because you have to know, like in a march, like one of those old marches like Panama or Bugle Boy March or High Society, which part is the trio, where you drop real, down real low and build up the chorus, what part has the medium, like in the interlude, it's medium volume and it builds up, and you have to know those things when you play marches. So I had a good foundation at St. Aug.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then you went on, of course, you've made, what is your album count up to right now?
It's over 100.
That you've released under your name, not under your name, but I mean,
no, under my name.
You've contributed to over 100 albums.
Yeah, I'm on over 100 albums, but under my name it's 15.
15 records, a lot of
Yes.
them on Basin Street Records.
The majority of them are on Basin Street Records. I started recording with Basin Street in 2000, and that's been a very good relationship for me because I've been able to, write a lot of my own original songs and record them and get that music out, and I'm always surprised to find out there are people all over the world playing some of those songs, so in traditional bands.
Some of your original songs.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, and that's an important point because if New Orleans traditional jazz is to survive, you can't just keep playing Basin Street Blues all over. Great song. It's part of the repertoire for a reason, but it needs fresh compositions, and that's one of the things that you've contributed is a whole lot of new compositions.
Well, I've always felt that while I've gone back and played classic things that a lot of people don't play, the music of, Johnny Dodds and Sidney Bechet in the 1920s and stuff, which is great music, that music was created from the emotions, the spirit, the experiences, the lives of those musicians. We've experienced things that they didn't, like the 1960s, civil rights era, political assassinations, Hurricane Katrina, COVID, all of those things, good, bad, and ugly, create a wide variety of emotions. And those emotions can and should be used for art, should be used for music, should be used for jazz. So when I write themes, even though I'm using the principles of traditional New Orleans jazz, I'm using my own emotions. It might be, something from those contemporary events or places I've seen, or it might be something as simple as seeing a pretty girl pass by and writing a song inspired by that, or a painting, or something someone says,
A Pretty Girl Passing By is inspired probably 95% of all music ever written. I think every Beatles song was just about, was written about that, and a lot of Bruce Springsteen songs. Everybody writes about that. So,
Right.
So there you go.
Right.
Yeah, and that is important because again, those guys, the traditional jazz legends, they were writing songs of their time. But you're absolutely right. We have to write songs of this time, or else that music becomes just a museum.
Right,
music,
right. And that idea, there are people around the world that are playing traditional New Orleans jazz, and some of them are doing so creatively, but ironically in New Orleans that idea is kind of not very popular. People a lot of times don't look at New Orleans jazz as a viable art form for new creative expression. Mm-hmm. But I figured out long ago that you can write new songs, you can blend traditional New Orleans jazz with other ethnic folk musics and come up with some interesting things. You can take songs from other genres and put them into the language of traditional New Orleans jazz and make some interesting things happen. So, like for example, we played songs by Bob Marley and Janis Joplin and Lead Belly and all of that kind of stuff, and make some interesting mix. Even what is her name?
Britney Spears?
No, but close, close. Back to Black.
Amy Winehouse.
Amy Winehouse, yes.
Yeah.
Several of her songs make good New Orleans jazz songs.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So it's about the
Rehab, maybe rehab.
Well,
something that ties into New Orleans a little bit.
The
maybe?
theme,
Yeah.
but music, but songs like her Back to Black.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, it's great because you can take those melodies and the vibe and use that. Reggae music. There are a lot of different things that you can use to make interesting things happen. So.
Well, and like I said in the intro, you have become so prolific at writing new songs. Did you tell me you're writing songs just about every day?
Just about every day. Sometimes I write as many as 3 whole songs a day. I can't believe it. I don't know what's happening. It's never been like this before. I used to have to go on a retreat or something, to write a few songs for a month or something. But now it's become like a daily habit. I get up, I brush my teeth, I eat, I go to the bathroom, and I write songs. And that happens every day.
Are they good?
Some of them are good, but what I find is they talk about musicians being artists, and I feel like a real artist because I write out songs on a piece of paper, and like a lot of artists do with their sketchbooks, they'll sketch a little something that may become something or might not. So I have a lot of complete songs, some songs that need to be finished, some that need lyrics, some that are just beginnings of ideas. So all of that, whatever comes, and there are a lot of times in different genres too. A lot of them are traditional New Orleans jazz type songs, including hymns and blues, a few marches, rags, pop songs, but some of them are rhythm and blues and free jazz and modern jazz and all kind of things. So whatever comes, that's what I just write it out.
You're writing a lot of rap?
Not a lot, but I have. I have a couple of them.
All right, all right. I'd like to hear Dr. Michael White rapping.
Yeah, well, one of them is R-rated, so I don't know. I'm not going to rap, but I might get it to somebody.
Again, something I did not expect to hear, but all right. No, yeah, that sort of creativity. I mean, now that you're retired, I mean, you spent 43 years at Xavier as a professor, so now. Has that freed you up to, I mean, has that kind of unleashed the creative floodgates now that you don't have the responsibilities of being a professor anymore?
Well, I started the semester before COVID. I would go to my office at school like 7 in the morning. No one was there, and I would be, you know, I would sit at the desk, and all of a sudden I'd have these musical ideas. It was like the radio was always on in my head. And then I just started writing them down. And so I would keep a clarinet in my office, music paper, pen handy, and whatever came, I'd just write it down in the morning. And so that just continued, you know, and then it continued through different parts of the day. So it got so bad that I keep clarinets and music paper in different places, downstairs in my house, upstairs in my house, you know. And but it's been a lot of fun because it's almost like meeting someone or knowing someone that you didn't know before. I'm like, where is all this stuff coming from? It's hard to believe that it's coming out of me. So some of them are really interesting, and I hope to start by the end of the year recording some of the new songs.
So right now you're just writing down the notes, writing down the
yeah, I write down melodies, chords, and some songs lyrics as well.
Okay, okay. You spent 43 years at Xavier. Started off Spanish, was you originally?
Yes, my degrees are in Spanish. Like you know,
your doctorate's in.
Dr. Michael White, the doctorate is in Spanish, and I taught Spanish for 20 years at Xavier. But about 8 years in, I started also teaching African American music, and about 21 or so years ago, I received the Keller Endowed Chair, which allowed me to work on promoting New Orleans culture as I saw fit. So I taught the African American music course all the way through, and then I also created a series called Culture of New Orleans series, in which we would present different aspects of New Orleans culture in ways that you don't normally see with authentic practitioners and scholars, and we would always have a music component, of course, but people would be interviewed, they got a chance to speak. Sometimes we would combine genres or present things that people don't really know about. Like we had the world's largest Mahalia Jackson Centennial celebration. That particular thing was a week long, and we had several concerts. We had some of her relatives come in, but we've done programs on things like modern jazz in New Orleans that featured Ellis Marsalis. We've done things like the New Orleans roots of Duke Ellington. We've done things on the Mardi Gras Indians. We've had programs on jazz funerals, young brass bands, baby dolls, all different aspects, Black New Orleans, Mardi Gras traditions. We featured many different kinds of programs.
All aspects of, related to New Orleans culture. Those 40 years you spent at Xavier, did you notice a change in the students and their interests over the years, or has there always been sort of a consistent interest in learning about a lot of this New Orleans culture and the music that you're teaching? Well,
you know, in teaching African American music, New Orleans is a big part of it, such an important music center throughout history. And I find the course that I taught was an elective, a free elective, and I found that students consistently remained interested in that, learning about New Orleans history, and the place of the city and its contribution to American music.
So they were into it. You were also something of a music historian. I mean, you over the years had amassed this incredible collection of early jazz music and photos and instruments and what have you, and you alluded to it earlier that you lost a lot of that material in Katrina. You had a house in Gentilly that was near the canal, flooded, and you know, it was one of the more remarkable experiences of my career as a journalist. You remember that the first time you went back to your house after the storm, you allowed me to accompany you, and I think Jason Barry, the filmmaker, was also there. and we went with you to your house for the first time. And looking back to that, man, I mean, I can't believe how you kept your emotions in check that day, seeing your life's work, your life's collection just ruined like that that day. I mean, it was a remarkable scene.
Well, you know, I still can't believe that happened. And, you know, Jason filmed it. It is part of his documentary, City of a Million Dreams. That first time coming back and seeing all of that, it was very difficult. It felt like when I looked at the clarinets all over the house, pieces everywhere, it looked like bodies to me. Ooh. And I saw so much destroyed. And, you know, it wasn't just material things. It was things that were important to the history of New Orleans. I had started studying jazz history when I was a grad student at Tulane. For breaks, I used to go to the Hogan Jazz Archive and spent a lot of time there studying jazz history, and that was a beginning for me. I had amassed a large collection of books and other materials, recordings, photographs. But I had also interviewed many musicians born before 1910 that I had the chance to know and play with, and I was writing down notes or taping them. They told me a lot of things that weren't in history books, so I had planned to write about a lot of that. And I had all of those kind of things. I had a collection of vintage instruments. So yeah, I had lost all of those things, and it was devastating. It was really devastating.
But since then, I mean, you started to build back up. I imagine you've got more stuff, and you've got a house with 2 stories. So you got stuff on the 2nd floor now, right?
I have a house with 2 stories. I have more books and recordings than ever before. I have more books than some libraries. But you know, a lot of the interviews and things that I lost, of course, were irreplaceable. Some of the valuable instruments. The hardest loss for me was a classic white clarinet mouthpiece that was owned by Sidney Bechet. And there are pictures of him with that mouthpiece, and he made some famous recordings with that. It was given to me by his student, clarinetist and saxophonist Bob Wilbur. And I looked for that for weeks through the rubble, but we couldn't find it. So that was a hard loss. But I had collected a lot of other material. When I played with older musicians, I would collect, you know, reeds and brass band hat bands with the name of the band on them, old banjo and guitar strings, bass strings, broken drumsticks from, you know, early jazz music. So I had a little museum collection, you know, pictures and all of that. So I had a lot of stuff. But I had started writing about jazz in the early 80s, and I was planning on doing more writing with the things that I had gotten from the older musicians. But, you know, now it's mainly memory.
Mainly memory. Well, speaking of collections, the portrait of you that has now been acquired by the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, a portrait of you by Timothy Clark. And there it is on the screen there, we're taking a look at it. What an honor to have a rendering of you deemed worthy of inclusion in the Smithsonian's portrait collection. Well,
I'm humbled by that. I feel very honored. You know, and it's ironic the way things work in life. The week that I found out that was going to happen, they said, you can't tell anybody, you're sworn to secrecy, because it'll jeopardize the project. It's still in committees that have to decide, but it looks like it's going to happen. That very week, I got a call from Wynton Marsalis to go and play the National Portrait Gallery Gala, where they were unveiling portraits of famous celebrities at this massive event as a fundraiser. So I was sitting there when this is going on, and I'm seeing all these portraits unveiled of people like Venus and Serena Williams, Dr. Fauci, and Marion Wright Edelman, and you know, there were about 7 of them, and it was amazing. And I was thinking, is this real? They're going to have my portrait? It's hard to believe, you know.
And so wait, Wynton didn't know when he invited you to do that? He had no idea that your portrait was going to be included?
No, I didn't tell him.
Wow.
I was sworn to secrecy, so
wow.
I didn't say a word. But it was surreal. It was surreal.
Do you think Timothy Clark captured your likeness okay in that portrait?
Well, you know, I remember when the Obama's pictures came out, and people were talking about that. You know, I think he makes me look like a dignified politician or a judge. You know, it looks like I can't think of the guy's name right now, but
Thurgood Marshall?
Thurgood Marshall, exactly. That's exactly right. It makes me look like Thurgood Marshall, so that's in good company, you know.
That is. I was going to say, it does make you look very distinguished. I mean, you are actually, I mean, in real life, also very distinguished looking, but I mean, that portrait is especially distinguished. Thurgood Marshall with a clarinet in his hand.
Yes, yes, but I'm in a lot of good company there. So I'm very honored with that, because I don't think it's just, you know, just me, but it's the idea of all the older musicians I knew in this New Orleans tradition, which is very important in American music and still played around the world. I feel like that all of that is there with me with the portrait. Absolutely,
and you're representing, it's not just representing you, but it's representing the tradition of New Orleans jazz that's now in the portrait gallery with that. So that's awesome. That's awesome. Dr. McWhite, this has been a lot of fun. I thank you for bringing the Holiday Inn horn and the other horn here. And I really look forward to hearing all this music that you're writing in retirement. It sounds very exciting.
Yes, on the 29th of this month, I have a special concert with a troupe from Spain called Fandango a Louisiana, and at the Jefferson Performing Arts Center. And I'm writing an original composition that combines New Orleans jazz and Spanish flamenco music.
Well, you taught Spanish for all those years, so you should know a thing or two about Spanish music too.
A little bit,
yes. A little bit. Well, very good. We'll look forward to hearing that and all the other music, including that rap. Can't wait to hear your raps.
Oh, well, it's coming. It's coming.
All right. You heard it here first, folks. All right. Well, I am Keith Spera. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time on Let's Talk.